healing every disease and sickness. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, "The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out his workers into the harvest field." So Jesus is walking through all the hills and villages, the towns of Galilee. The vast majority of the people living in these places were poor farmers. They are living a day-to-day existence, not exactly sure where their next meal is going to come from. Most of them were uneducated, and the future was pretty much chosen for them since the day they were born. If you were a man, you were most likely going to take on whatever trade your dad had. And if you were a woman in this society, you were most likely going to take care of the family and cook. And I think a lot of our parents grew up in places like this, puro Latino, right? The towns and villages of Galilee had fishermen, had farmers, carpenters, tent makers, tanners, tax collectors, a few teachers of the law here, and a Pharisee there. And where I grew up, in Montebello, we had the tamales lady, the elotes guy, El Paletero, who for some weird reason drove his truck around the neighborhood at 10 p.m. My neighbors were mechanics, they were cleaning ladies, they were nannies, truck drivers, and factory workers. Like many of our families, the people in this passage lived day to day, paycheck to paycheck, one day at a time. And there are some who would read this passage and say that this day-to-day existence gave the people in this passage no hope. But I would argue that I look forward to my future every single day when my dad came home. And I would argue that my parents looked with hope to my future when they decided to cross the border illegally to give me opportunities that they had never had. We were poor, but we were never hopeless. We might not have had everything that we wanted, but we always had dreams. Matthew tells us that Jesus is walking through the pueblos and barrios of Galilee, East LA, Oakland, Fresno, and he tells us that Jesus is teaching in the synagogues, he is proclaiming the good news of the kingdom of God and curing every disease and sickness. Matthew mentions this casually. And if we use our imaginations, we can see Jesus passing through our neighborhood, teaching. Maybe with a bullhorn on a corner at a storefront Pentecostal church. And maybe at a confirmation or catechism class in our neighborhood. And if we use our imagination, we can picture the Lord walking through the streets of the neighborhoods that we grew up in, healing our people of our diseases and our sicknesses, of alcoholism and domestic violence that plagues our families, of grandma's high blood pressure and diabetes, of my dad's unchecked high cholesterol that took him out at age 35, of the loneliness that men and women feel that lead them to enter into relationships that aren't good for them, or of the unmet sense of belonging that some of our young men feel in the neighborhood that causes them to join gangs. And the more that you and I use our imagination, the more we come to quickly realize the possibility that maybe, right, just maybe, Jesus would feel at home walking through our neighborhoods, teaching, proclaiming, and healing. And maybe we could come to the conclusion once again that he chooses to engage with those at the margins, the poor, the immigrant, and the outcast. So Jesus shows up in the barrios and the pueblos of Galilee. Now, Matthew makes it a point to tell us that what Jesus is doing is proclaiming the kingdom of God. Now, most of us, I think, we would read that phrase, the good news of the kingdom, without dwelling on it. Right? We automatically conclude that what he's doing is going around telling people that he's going to die for their sins, which at this point makes absolutely no sense, right? If somebody walked in to our neighborhood and saying, "Hey, follow me, I'm going to die for you," what would you say? It's not going to happen. The Greek word for good news in this passage is euangelion, and would have been understood by Matthew's readers to refer to Caesar's rule and Rome's military power. When the Roman armies conquered the enemy, the emperor would send out a herald, right, or a messenger to all villages, to all towns of the kingdom. And he would say, this is the Evangelion, this is the good news. Caesar is Lord and King. Our enemies have been defeated. The good news was therefore an affirmation of Rome's ability to destroy and to control every people group in the Mediterranean. But Jesus comes on the scene declaring a different type of good news. Not the good news of Roman political power and military power and oppression, but the good news of a different kingdom. And if you and I had the time to take a look at the whole Old Testament, to study this word kingdom and what it's about, we would look at the book of Genesis, about how God made humanity in his own image and commands them to multiply across the face of the earth, to have dominion. We would look at about how humanity rejected